All right, welcome everyone. If you'd like to type your city and country from which you are connecting, it's always nice to see. And today, of course, is the workshop on additional indicators and analyses. Today's the 4th of December, 2017. We're now entering week 3 of survey. Scholar Module A3. So before handing it off to Carolina Da Navarro, who is leading this workshop, just want to show you the reminder of the ground rules that you're by now very familiar with, and have a couple of, let's say, these are just questions for Carolina rather than the full agenda, and really to make sure that we link what is being discussed with the work at hand, and really emphasize that this is a participatory session. It's an occasion for you, unlike the more formal setting of the weekly discussion group, to really ask your questions using the chat or by raising your hand. And I see, in fact, Simon has already raised his hand, so I'll come to you right before. Carolina, if you raised your hand by mistake, just click the little hand icon that you have to lower it. So we do want to get a sense of exactly where we're at as we before diving into Carolina's presentation. So let me just unmute Simon. And Simon, did you intentionally raise your hand, or, and if so, what is your comment or question before we get started?
No, it was just at the beginning. I put it down. It was unintentional. Maybe later I may come up with some options, but not now.
Okay, look forward to hearing and reading your questions and comments. Okay, Carolina, then can you briefly tell us, before we deep dive into your presentation, what are we discussing and how is this discussion useful to developing survey results? That's in general, but more pragmatically for the participants in the course, under a lot of pressure now to finish the creator project this week. How is this discussion intended to help us finish our creator projects? And you'll need to unmute yourself.
Hello everyone. So to answer Reda's questions, we'll be discussing some of the main analysis that can be done beyond coverage. So we do a vaccination coverage survey where the main, of course, indicator is coverage with the different vaccines and with different doses, etc. But we will be discussing what else we can do with surveys, particularly with surveys that have a lot of dates. How is this useful to develop the survey results? This is extremely important because in your creator project you will be either calculating some of these indicators if you're in the analyst group, or using and interpreting these results. Then key concepts and issues is, I will mention them in my presentation, but I think the main concept is that you can do more than just calculate coverage, and that probably you should do more after all the investment in the survey. It's really important to explain clearly how you're calculating the indicators, and be mindful who is in the numerator and denominator of these indicators we'll discuss, and examples on how to apply these concepts. We'll see them in the examples, but you can really do them for your own survey. You can also analyze do secondary data analysis from other surveys that are already available, and this is particularly true with some of the DHS and mixed surveys that countries usually have, and the databases are publicly available upon request. And also, if you're planning a survey, and you understand exactly how you could do many more analysis, you can think ahead and try to optimize in as much as possible the data collection. That's it. Q&A, or we'll do that at the end.
At the end, I think so. Thank you, Carolina. I'm now going to hand over presenter rights so that you may share your presentation. And again, I'll be keeping an eye on the questions and collecting them as you speak, so that and then we'll try not to interrupt you so that you can go through the content, and then we can have the discussion and the Q&A that around once people have taken in your presentation. So over to you.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can, or I can.
Okay, and I hope in my screen the right side is covered with the chat for now, but it's not covering yours.
No.
Yes, it looks good. Looks great.
Okay, good. Okay, so the header of this presentation, or the title of this presentation, it's beyond vaccination coverage. What additional analysis we can do? Oopsie. So the big picture is that many reports only have basic indicators, and that's fine, particularly when your findings really show that coverage is really low. You may not want to do more if in your survey you have identified that the coverage in the country or in the area where you did the survey, it's very low, and probably you need to focus on fixing that rather than analyzing more qualitative stuff about the immunization program. Another thing that it's important, it's because there are so many possibilities of analysis, is that we are encouraging to make data and programs available. So again, so we have more of a community that we can do enrich from each other and learn from each other and do more with the data we have. The next point is that, as you know, through Dale, we have developed, and Dale and his team, we have developed, well, he has developed software to do many of the analysis, is the vaccination coverage quality indicators, or VICI, and that's available for you to use. So another very important message is that we really need to understand what we are reporting and how it's calculated, because sometimes we may be comparing oranges with strawberries. And that's particularly important, for example, to understand how the missing data, how the don't knows are being vaccinated. So in this slide, we just show that it's critical to show who is included, who is excluded from the analysis, how is the denominator and numerator calculated when we're talking about proportions, is the analysis weighted or not, and the interpretation. So if some of these analyses include confidence intervals or any other measure of uncertainty, how do I interpret that? How I include that when I'm interpreting the data? So just as a reminder, a lot of what I'm going to say today, it's in chapter 6 of the manual, and it includes some of the information that I'll talk today. So first of all is the descriptive analysis, and this, at least for the managers, links very much with the assignment from week 2, where you had to look at the descriptive description of the survey in Nigeria. So how many households were visited, how many had respondents, how many refused, how many were completed, etc., etc. And also a reminder in this descriptive analysis, it's if some region or some area you could not go to, the survey is not going to be representative of that area. And again, in the Nigeria example, that's very much the case in some places. So the results are really for Nigeria minus those places to be exactly correct if we talked about that survey. So just in the description, in the manual, again, section 6.1, we showed the organ pie plots that every line, it's a cluster. So this is not really coverage. It's, oops, this describe in detail tomorrow, forget it. It's a leftover from recycling the slide. So we'll, to Balram, we'll explain how you can get Vicky a little later. You can summarize the results graphically. So in each line is a cluster, and you see how many are vaccinated in that cluster in the or gray shade. So in this cluster, it shows you 4 provinces where the coverage is 75% in the first one, for example, and the intra-cluster correlation is 0.025. The next one has a higher coverage and a higher intercluster correlation, and so forth. So here, what is really important is that it's not coverage, but at least if you look at this data, you can have some idea on if there are clusters that are alarmingly low, or if there are big differences. For example, we looked at, was it a DHS or a mix? I don't remember. A recent survey published for Guinea-Bissau for cards using these graphs, and cards were much less available in urban or rural areas. I don't remember again, but there was a big difference. And just looking at these graphs, you can identify clusters where things are surprisingly low. And there is a question, a caution note at the bottom. So coming back to the basics now, to coverage. This is the basic, so I'm not going to stop here, but this is really what we normally get in a routine immunization coverage survey, coverage with the different vaccines. And the crude coverage calculation is what we usually get. Every child who is eligible at the time of the survey contributes their weight to the denominator, and then children with any evidence, are the children who go in the numerator, meaning any child who had a card with that vaccine shown as given with a tick mark with a date, or if you went to the health facility, that child had that dose as given, or the mother or caregiver said, yes, my child got that vaccine. If the answer is no, if it's missing, or if it's don't know, it's not in the numerator. And then the sum over all children. So for crude coverage here, I will be the crude coverage. I will be presenting what's shown in Wiki, what's the code in Wiki. As I said, considers all sources of info by the time of survey. You can do it also by age 12 months, but there is a caveat there that that assumes that everybody who didn't have a date would behave the same way as those with a date, which we know is not true, but it's a very standard analysis that is done. And this crude coverage is done weighted and with a software that accounts for complex sampling. Another standard analysis is card availability, and in fact, this can be broken into two. It's card ever given versus card now available, because that's the difference. Many people may have received a card and then lost it, but that's not always the case. In some cases, some people never got a card because they were out of cards or something. And then dates. Having a card doesn't necessarily mean you have a date, because the card may not have the date, may have a tick mark. The card may be unreadable, so there is a date there, but you cannot make out what numbers there are there. So it's important that also to understand the documented dates available, because a lot of the analysis we will talk about use dates. So that's why I'm emphasizing this so much. Before we, so sorry, one more and then I'll open for questions just for this part. Because these are weighted indicators, they also have confidence intervals. And in Wiki here listed, all of these indicators are reported with the confidence intervals. Any questions so far? Okay, I will continue, or rather you tell me.
So we just have Carolina, we just have a comment on the problem with pipes, that some will be true, others will be data quality issues, such as, or that is, interviewers faking becomes very apparent per cluster. And then we have Balram's question about how can we get Wiki software?
Yeah, the point that Bo raised is really relevant, that yes, it sometimes can even give you clues of people who are cheating, and that's a fact. For Wiki, we'll leave that for the end to explain how you can get Wiki. So I will continue.
And just one more
Yes.
one more request from Shanawaz Jiskani to differentiate crude and valid coverage.
We'll get to that. So basically, you read my mind. The crude coverage was the coverage, any evidence of vaccine given by the time of survey, divided by everyone in the survey, right? Or the weights when it's weighted. The valid coverage, okay, considers sources with documented dates. So basically, it's valid if the vaccine was given at or after the minimum age, for example, at or after 6 weeks for a DTP, diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis vaccine containing penta or DTP. And also, the valid includes that the interval between doses was appropriate, and it's usually 28 days. So for example, if the first DTP or penta was given today, and the second is given in 2 weeks from now, even though that vaccine was given and it would have been counted as a second dose in the crude, it will not be counted as valid because the immunologically it's not going to give an adequate immune response, and that's the main reason for these valid doses. Now, this, if the denominator includes everyone, that would mean that whether you gave the vaccine too early or you gave it with the wrong interval, usually shorter interval, but also if you don't have a date, you will be called as invalid. So valid and only those people who, on top of having a date, that date shows that the vaccine was given at or after the minimum age, and with more at or longer interval between doses as recommended. So basically, if very few people have dates in the card, valid coverage is going to be very low because those people, we don't know in the end if they had a valid dose or not, but we are just counting what we can count in the denominator, in the numerator. So in some surveys, the alternate denominator used, it's only those with dates. So among those people with dates, how many had a valid dose? Meaning how many the vaccine was given at or after the minimum age and with the adequate interval between doses. And in that case, the analysis is usually unweighted. So I'll move on from the valid, and we'll get back to valid a little later in the presentation. Another standard analysis is this dropout rate. So for example, of the people who got DTP1, how many ended up getting the third dose, the DTP3? The usual formula is DTP1 minus DTP3 divided by DTP1 and expressed in percentage. But also you can look at dropout between PCV vaccines, meaning pneumococcal vaccine, or rotavirus vaccine. Now it has a lot of emphasis for the human papilloma virus vaccine, for the cholera vaccine. Any dropout is really between earlier and later doses. And the importance is that you know that the people exist that were there and you were able to capture them with one dose, but then for some reason they drop out from the system or you miss them. So before I get to additional analysis, any questions so far?
So Carolina, we have a request for maybe more explanation about reading and interpreting organ pipe charts. And then a question from Bo, how do you calculate confidence intervals for crude coverage of vaccination before age 1? And I believe Dale has already answered or provided responded in the chat. Jethro Chakoya asks, is the explanation to the weighted analysis? And Shanawaz Jiskani, valid coverage denominator is everyone. Does this everyone include only vaccinated or all eligible children?
Okay, I will start with the last question. So normally it includes everyone. So normally valid coverage is going to be fairly low because it's not counting, it's counting as not valid anybody without the date. That's kind of the default. But in many cases, it's very reasonable to have as the denominator only those with dates. I hope that makes sense. To vote, I'll ask Dale to share with everybody the answer later. The organ pipe plots, I can go back to that, and the way that it's coming up. Okay. So when do you do additional analysis? Analysis you do if coverage is quite good. Again, if coverage is low, you should be really vaccinating, period. But if coverage is reasonable, then you can pay more attention to more qualitative things about the program, about when the vaccines are given, etc. You may also be able to do secondary analysis, and by secondary really means do extra analysis of surveys that are already available. So do analysis on existing data sets, but always be mindful of the interpretation, because a lot of these additional analysis have to do with dates. And again, if there are not a whole lot of dates, you can really be talking about, you can really talk about only among those people with dates, this is true in the survey. So if, just a quick note there, if you're going to use a survey that is not yours, meaning if you're going to do it a DHS data set, a mixed data set, an old EPI survey, first you want to make sure that you're absolutely sure you're using the right database. So it's really important to be able to compare what you get with your own analysis to what they were reporting in the report. If they do not match, you need to understand why first. But if they do match, if they do not, if they do match, you can proceed. So for this session, because we don't have the entire day, we're going to focus on the first three analyses that are mentioned here as the additional analysis: timeliness, age at receipt of each dose, and simultaneity and missed opportunities. Okay. And here in this presentation is quite long because I put a lot of other slides at the very end. So just a caution again, because a lot of the analysis I'll be talking about depend on dates, and if you don't have dates or the dates were carelessly recorded, we'll have a problem. Okay, and this is a Dale slide. So if you're planning a survey and dates are going to be important, you have to be really careful to get good dates in the database. And the pictures can be very useful. So this is for JETRO probably. So most of this additional analysis will be unweighted because it's looking at just people with cards, right? So it's not the entire population. But let me just explain that weighted estimates, so at the bottom of the slide, are really, they will give you inferences about the entire population. They will tell you the coverage for the entire place where the people in the sample came from. And they are, so each person in the survey has a weight, meaning they are representing an X number of other people in the survey. So for example, if I am in the survey, I may be representing people from Geneva, X people from Geneva. If my data is going to be combined with people from Zurich to calculate the coverage for Switzerland, that person from Zurich will have a different weight because that person will be representing X people from Zurich. And at the end, that's really be important. So it's reported with uncertainty because we are not doing a census of the entire population of Switzerland, say. We are really looking at samples. And because we use a probability sampling with weighted analysis, we can say that the results are representative of the entire population. And yes, there can be some limitations, of course, because biases are a possibility, etc. Now, unweighted, so if you just do the, in the sample, X number of people had BCG vaccination, for example, divided by the entire sample size, you will get an unweighted proportion. But that's not, that doesn't allow you to say that that's the coverage in, let's say, Switzerland, because you are giving the same weight to every person in the survey, and they were selected with a different probability. Okay. But we use these sample proportions when we're describing things that we don't have for the entire survey people, for example, with dates. So it's just a description of what was observed in the sample as a proportion, for example. We always report the N, and in Wiki we do not include uncertainty because we are not making inferences about the population. Okay, timeliness. So timeliness, there is not one definition globally of what is a vaccine given timely, because it depends a lot on the schedule and depends on the vaccine. Okay, but in general, it gives you an idea of at what age people are being vaccinated compared to the age at which the vaccine was recommended. Time between sequential doses also, if the sequential doses are supposed to be given 1 month apart or 2 months apart, how that they are actually being given. You can also in timeliness look at vaccines that are given too young, and that may be important for immunological reasons. If you're giving the measles containing vaccine too early, any particularly diphtheria containing vaccine before 6 weeks of age, and so forth. These doses, if they are too soon together, they are not timely, and on top of that will not be valid. Some doses are very late. For example, if in my country they recommend measles containing vaccine at 9 months and the child in the survey got it at 15 months, it's given, it's there, but it's later than desired, and the schedule has the vaccines at a certain age for a reason, which is the balance between the most immunogenic and the so when is more immunogenic and what age it's ideal to have, okay, from a practical point of view. So most doses, if they are given with too long in between, again, they will likely be valid, but again, you're leaving people way too long unprotected. So I want you to have a look at this graph to try to understand it. So the first line is BCG. Okay, BCG is recommended in most countries at birth. So that's why you see an increase almost at 0 until at about 40%. Okay, but then some people continue to get vaccinated. This is an example for Burkina, DHS 2010. People continue receiving the BCG vaccine up to, I would say, 60 days, well, in about 100 days. By the time they are 100 days, the coverage has reached about 80%. Okay, so this graph, the beauty of it is that it gives you the whole trajectory of the vaccination with each vaccine. And ideally, you would have a line that goes up on the date of the recommended dose, and that then stabilizes because everybody got vaccinated at the recommended age. Okay. On the other extreme here, you have the MCV containing the measles containing vaccine, and the line is set at 9 months. And you can see that not that many people actually got the vaccine at 9 months. About 20% got it, in fact, before 9 months. And then by the time the children are 500 days, the proportion vaccinated is not even at 80%. And the slope of the curve will show you a little bit how rapid the uptake is. Does it make sense so far? I hope so. Okay, if anybody has questions, please ask me. I'll finish with timeliness and I'll open for questions again. So this is just the measles vaccination. So in the previous slide, we saw the last line that was measles, right? That was not very timely. And here is by the different regions in Burkina. Okay, and you can see that this blue line, the Sahel place, it's the one that performs the worst, and it seems to be also some of the more delayed, even though it's difficult to tell. The place that performs the best in this survey was Centre Sud, that not only reaches a higher coverage, but also the line seems to be more straight up. There are ways to do this with confidence intervals and even in designs. And in the materials, we're sharing a paper from El Salvador where we did this for rotavirus, but those analyses were done in R. And here is the other options for timeliness, right? Because those curves are the survival inverse curves that are beautiful, but there are other ways to show the data. In the first example, in this country, pentavalent was recommended at 246. And you can see that the vaccine is mostly given at the pentavalent is mostly given at 6 months as is recommended. So in this example, in this graph, this is from Bolivia, you have seen most children completed the 3-dose pentavalent schedule before or between the ages of 5 and 9 months. And a large proportion were vaccinated at the recommended age of 6 months. Another option to present timeliness or look at timeliness is present the average age or the mean age at vaccination. And there is a survey paper that we have shared for Haiti. Oh no, we haven't shared that we could share, but basically they present the mean age with the interquartile range. And in that particular country, even though the recommended age was 9 months, the median age was, average at median, sorry. Sorry about that. The median age in that particular country, instead of being 9 months or even close to 9 months, was a little after 12 months. Or you can just, for timely, you can just say, is timely yes or no, but you would have, of course, to define what is timely. Again, there is no global consensus, but most countries would say that within a month of the recommended age is timely. And these are the big key timeliness indicators. Before I get to simultaneity, any questions?
So no further questions, but there have been some. There's been some back and forth around the valid coverage denominators for everyone question, with a response from Dale, and then a comment from Felicity Cutts, who says, I think secondary analyses of missed opportunities would be helpful, especially when coverage is low, not only when coverage is high, as long as card availability is okay or dates are available from registers.
Those are good points. So we'll give the mic to Dale just after my talk. And for Felicity, yes, we're getting to miss opportunities, and you're right. Even in a place with low coverage, that's important. Okay, simultaneity. You do have in the material that we have shared with you some example of simultaneity of vaccination done in a DHS from Honduras. So that's available in the shares. And in El Salvador paper that you also have seen, we also looked at simultaneity to see which vaccines, when more than one vaccine is recommended at the same visit, if they are actually given at the same visit. And this is becoming more and more important with the many injectable vaccines, because in the field, in some places, we have seen that usually it's the nurse rather than the mother, but they may be nervous about giving too many injections. So even though the calendar, the schedule may call for Penta, PCV, Rota, and IPV in the same visit, the nurse, from her own idea, may decide to give just the Penta and the Rota, for example, and then tell the mother to come back later, okay? And that's not, that is not in the manual, this simultaneity, but it's really easy to do, because basically you look at those vaccines that are recommended at the same age, if they actually have the same date given, okay? And it can also talk about the it can also talk about stockouts. So why vaccines that are not given at the same time. We also, in some places, have seen non-simultaneity of measles-containing vaccine and yellow fever, because the yellow fever has more wastage. So the nurses were reluctant to open a yellow fever vial more than a measles-containing vaccine vial, just because there was shortages, etc. So they would be different. They would not be very simultaneous, the yellow fever with the MCV. Moving on. Oopsie. Okay, missed opportunities for vaccination. So to do missed opportunity analysis, you really need to have dates again. It basically means that, let's say you do go to get a measles containing vaccine. Let's say you went at 10 months and they give you the measles containing vaccine. But instead of checking if you were up to date with your Penta, with your polio, you're only given the measles containing vaccine, even though you would still be eligible for the pentavalent and for the polio vaccine, even if late. So you are there, you are being vaccinated, you have your body there to be receiving vaccines, and they are not given. Okay? So if that child was eligible, let's say a Penta 3, but did not receive it at the time that they did receive a measles containing vaccine, that's a missed opportunity for vaccination. Now, there might be a valid reason. You may have a contraindication for pertussis, or so this analysis just tells you, it's just to flag that you may have had a missed opportunity, right? But the main issue here, it's really, if you see a lot of missed opportunities, it's unlikely that a whole lot of people have contraindications. It's more likely that there might be shortages of vaccines, or that the nurses or vaccinators are not really checking your card to put you up to date. Or they may even have the wrong belief that you are too old to receive a certain vaccine. So let's say in your survey, you had a child who had missed a polio vaccine. Okay, let's say the polio 1 vaccine had been missed, and the child got a Penta 2. No, that's a bad example, sorry. Let's think that the child had a missed opportunity for Penta 3 when he went to get the measles containing vaccine, okay? And then there is another opportunity, the child went back and eventually got the Penta 3. So that missed opportunity was corrected. In most cases, those missed opportunities, when you're looking at them through surveys, are not corrected, meaning that at the time of the survey, they would have received the measles containing vaccine, but they would still be missing the pentavalent 3. If you want to read more about missed opportunities in general, because there are ways to do analysis with people who actually goes to health facilities, you just check the cards and see if they are there in the health facility and they are still missing a dose. So that information is there. Now, in the manual, there is a whole lot about missed opportunities. So again, this is a very low-hanging fruit. This is something you can fix much easier than when you don't know how to get people to come to your clinic because they live very, very far places. These are the indicators in Wiki. And in Wiki, we have the way of doing this missed opportunity analysis with CRUD. So everybody, regardless of the age, and even if the child received them at the different, like at the wrong ages, let's say the first dose is not valid because it's at 4 weeks, but if basically the child received all 3, is considered to have received 3 doses, that would not be a missed opportunity when he's not at 9 months. But in reality, if we're looking at valid, that child would be eligible to receive a pentavalent because that first dose was invalid. I hope this makes sense. So it's not, the CRUD is only about the number of vaccines received. The valid, it's about not only the number, but that the vaccines were received at or after the minimum age at which is recommended, and with the interval, at least the interval that is recommended. That is 28 days for most vaccines. So when you're doing this analysis, the valid, because it's picky, because you are focusing on excluding some doses as given, just because they were not valid because they were given too early or too close to each other. So you can calculate both and compare.
When you select valid, Vicky is picky.
I like it, Vicky picky. So in this graph, you have in Burkina Faso, respondents with missed opportunities for DTP3. And then in the same country, if you're only looking at valid doses, you would see that you have a bigger proportion. I'll give you this slide for you to, in fact, the previous slide, to have a look and take some time to digest this. In this example, the child has received 3 vaccines. The first one was given too early. So I will, so when that child goes for the measles containing vaccine, it will not be counted as a missed opportunity because it's just looking at CRUD. It's looking whether it got 3 vaccines or not. The same child, right, that same child, if you're looking at valid, goes to receive the measles containing vaccine at 9 months, you should really give him a 3rd or a 4th pentadose at that point. And if you didn't, that would be a missed opportunity because the first dose was not valid. I know this is complicated, but I hope it's making some sort of sense. Again, the material is there for you to read. Valid. So if you're doing missed opportunities for valid doses, it's always going to be more missed opportunities because it requires really more understanding from the perspective of the nurse or vaccinator. It needs to understand that to really check the card, see that the doses given were given at the right age, meaning not too early, nor earlier than recommended, and with intervals that make sense. And on top of that, make the decision that then that particular dose is invalid, therefore that child needs the extra doses to be valid. This is very related. So if all those nurses or vaccinators were doing this, were to realize that, okay, if I have a child at 9 months who is I'm giving him or her, or at 10 months or whatever months, but when they go get the measles containing, that is missing any dose of penta or polio, for example, or even BCG if it's under 1 year, and they were to give it, coverage would be higher. So in this example, this is the this is the valid coverage, right? The ones in hollow. And then if there were no missed opportunities, so if those nurses were actually checking the cards, understanding the dates, and figuring out that that child needs to receive an extra vaccine, coverage can be a lot higher. So valid coverage in this place was about 50 or a little above 50, and it could be very high. And there are papers by, in the US particularly, of what coverage could be if people were always put up to date in next visits. I'll pass the mic to Dale. He has some comments.
Thanks, Carolina. So this is tricky because, yes, Bo, that's a good idea. One shot containing all the doses, that would be a good idea. So the first time you hear the MOV, there's a lot of language associated with it. The concept is very simple. The child was eligible for something that they didn't get, and that's what we're counting, and we're counting how many kids that happened to and for which doses, and how common is it, and how many vaccination visits do the child experience a missed opportunity. The indicators themselves, we have a stack of 30 or 40 papers where people have done missed opportunity analyses, and everyone does something that's reasonable, but no two people typically do exactly the same thing. So we are pleased to have written down exactly what we do and to make it available so that people can begin to do missed opportunities analyses that are comparable across surveys. So that's one strong point of this revised manual. And then Bo had a question about why are some of the indicators not weighted. And that's a point. That's a good point. There's a tradition in the EPI program that a lot of these additional indicators are not weighted. And at the moment, although we could weight everything, we certainly have the technology. We can do that now. Everything could be weighted. But at the moment, when an analysis includes everyone in the denominator, then we weight it and we attach a confidence interval to it. And when an analysis includes only a subset of the respondents in the denominator, because only a subset of them have provided the information we need to calculate it, or only a subset of them were eligible for this indicator. So for instance, for missed opportunities, we can only calculate it for kids with dates. If the denominator has only a subset of the kids, then for the sake of simplicity and tradition, we are reporting unweighted indicators. So we're at least fairly consistent on that point at this time, and some people have asked already that we go ahead and weight everything, and so WHO will take a look at that, I'm sure, moving forward. But at the moment, it will be a tremendous improvement if the people who report survey results, if they report anything regarding these unweighted indicators, and the unweighted information will certainly give the program some good information that they can use to manage it. Probably the weights are a very minor effect at that point with regard to knowing anything. So we think it will be a step forward for them to report these indicators at all, and then in the future we'll have more discussions regarding which ones should be weighted and which ones can do without the weights. Over.
Go ahead, Carolina. You'll need to unmute yourself.
Okay. Okay, so oopsie. I need to be on top of the slide to move it. So just the last of my slides to have a little time for questions. Remember that there are a bunch of additional slides if you want to study them. The reminders. First, it's really important to understand how each indicator is calculated and defined. Polio 0. Do you take just the first polio as polio 0, or do you take it up to 15 days? Do you take what do you do with the missing data? What do you do with the don't knows? Okay, so you should really have programs that help you clean the data, describe the data sets, analyze the data sets, and make tables and figures. Again, for more reproducibility of what you're doing. Vicky is trying to do this, and it's available now, and I'll pass it to Dale so he can say how people can get it. Also, if you are more comfortable in SPSS, R, or whatever, you can always develop and maybe do better things, but you can always test the tools in Wiki just to see if they give the same answers. But as an additional document to the manual, we are putting the definition of indicators, so at least a standard. The next one is that yes, we can do better, absolutely, and you are welcome to help. So that's why we're inviting you to always. I haven't told this to Reda, but I'm hoping that we can have an alumni of Survey Scholar so we can continue communicating as a community and learning from each other. But in the meantime, you can join TechNet and bookmark the WHO survey webpage. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you, Carolina. So it'd be good if you don't have, if there are no burning questions, it'd be good to hear from a couple of participants.
Can you pass it to Dale just to explain for Vicky?
Yes, indeed. Go ahead, Dale.
Thanks, Reda. So those of you who are interested, we've been sprinkling the word Vicky through our discussion here now for the last 2.5 weeks. And those of you who are interested can tune in next Monday morning at this same time, and I will do a briefing on the tool that we're calling Vicky. So we'll give you more details at that point. But if those of you who cannot wait one more week, those of you who have already finished your creator project and you have nothing to do this week, then you should go over to the TechNet 21 website. And on that website, there's a Vicky users group, and that's where all the manuals are available, the state of programs are available, and that's where we hope to begin. There's not too much dialogue on that users group yet, but we hope that some of you will become Vicky users and that group will be a place where we have some rich interactions as well. So I'll describe Vicky in a lot of detail 1 week from this morning. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Dale. And I'm sure many participants are resourceful enough to find their way to the Vicky users group, but I think we've also posted the links, or can do so on Wednesday ahead of your workshop. But definitely do join that workshop, and we're looking forward to your feedback on these workshops in terms of to what extent they are supporting your work and progress in this module. So a couple of comments, one from Bo. Again, I congratulate you on the huge amount of work you are and have been putting into this, including on standardization, recognizing that as a process. Al Yuso says, very interesting, and Segai Gute says, thank you very much, Dr. Carolina, for your impressive presentation and explanation. So it'd be good if either for you to type your burning questions into the chat so that Carolina, as well as Dale, Felicity, and John can take them on. And but it'd also be good to hear how your thoughts on this presentation and how it's how you're going to put it to use as you work on your Creator project this week and now in Creator, because we've just distributed the notifications. So are there any thoughts or yeah?
Rita, this is Dale. I'll just mention briefly to the analysts. I'll speak to the people for a moment who are in the analyst track. You have a requirement in your Creator project to make table shells for a few of the standard indicators, and then to select one additional indicator and to propose a table shell for that. So you can use the materials in the manual, you can use the materials in these slides, you can pick which one. You don't have to calculate the results for that additional indicator. You may, but you don't have to. So just remember that this presentation is quite relevant to those of you in the analyst track, because you need to pick one additional indicator and at least propose a table shell for it.
Okay.
Over.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Dale. And I would like to just take a quick poll. If you have looked at, reviewed the rubric, so you have instructions for the Creator project and then you have the actual rubric, could you just type yes or no, depending on whether you have or have not read the rubric that is relevant for you, either the manager or the analyst one? Okay, just yes or no. Yeah. Okay, so I would, for those of you who have not yet looked at it, I would strongly encourage you to go and look at it and consider how this relates back to this workshop and to Carolina's presentation. Carolina, we have 5 minutes left, and here is a question for Carolina from Janet. What is the graph visualization type that you showed in the presentation on slides 19 and 20? What is it called? And you'll need to unmute yourself. And just to clarify, before you answer, Carolina, everyone is receiving the Manager Creator Project invitation, but analysts also should ignore that and accept instead the analyst invitation. Just to yeah, go ahead, Carolina.
These are inverse survival curves. So these are, in fact, the survival curves come from cancer treatment, where you would see when people die. So it would be the other way around. So this is time to event, and yeah, inverse survival curves. If you want to see papers about it, Kathleen Wanna-Muller from CDC has published quite a bit of this analysis. And in the shares, we are sharing the one from El Salvador on rotavirus vaccination. That again, in that case, that was done using R to add the confidence intervals. But we have papers from Diane et al. We have some papers from Andy Clark and Sanderson on it, a summary of a bunch of DHS. And yeah, I mean, it has been used not so infrequently for immunization. And PAHO developed a module for secondary survey analysis, or analysis that can be done with immunization, with electronic immunization registries. We're sharing a draft because the final version is still under editing, but I don't know, Reda, if you already posted that. But that
yes,
draft
it's already in the shares. Yeah.
is in the shares, so you can read about it, how to even construct them.
Okay, thank you, Carolina. So we have a comment from Hassan Ibrahim who says, thanks, Dr. Carolina and Dale. Is Wiki purely for analysis, or can one use other software packages such as SPSS for entry and then do analysis using Wiki? And Dale has just needs to paste that. It will answer in the chat. Yes, thank you. Says Wiki is only for analysis of vaccination coverage surveys, and it is currently only implemented in Stata. We have Yep.
If I may add to that, what you can analyze data that has been entered using CS Pro, that has been entered using EpiInfo, in any other format. What it would make your life easier is if the names of the variables follow the Wiki nomenclature, but in any case still can be transformed over.
Okay, let's go to Joseph, who's had his hand raised. Joseph Bie, you'll have to unmute yourself so that we can hear you, and we're eager to hear from you. Go ahead, please. Okay, your microphone is unmuted, but at least I am not hearing anything. You may have another setting on your computer before you can unmute yourself. All right, we'll come back to you, Joseph. See if you can fix your audio connection, and we'll go to or type we'll go to Mohammed Imran Qureshi. Go ahead and please unmute yourself, and looking forward to hearing from you.
So thank you very much for this nice presentation from Carolina, and of course Dale and Reda, you're always there to assist them. So this is good teamwork. I must congratulate you all on doing this wonderful job. So just want to know regarding one of the surveys we have in Punjab, Pakistan, that is called the Punjab Health Survey. And I'm seeing the results. The result shows that 0 to 11 months children, OPV3 coverage is pretty low, like around 60 to 70% in most of the districts. But if we go towards the other age group, which is 12 to 23 months, the coverage is pretty high, more than 90-95%. Can you just explain in terms of the missed opportunity vaccinations, how is it possible, and there are ways and means to improve this OPV3 coverage after 1 year of age? Over.
Carolina, you need to unmute yourself, of course.
Okay, thank you. Yes, there are ways to improve that. So the reason it can be, if you're seeing that people are not being vaccinated after the like the normal age recommended for OPV3, right? But then they kind of recover. It can be that people are using the next visits to put them up to date. And a third dose late, it's better than no third dose at all. So you can even monitor this with your health surveys, because you can even do these graphs with that survey and see if they start improving. Or you can just even present the data month by month and see if for some reason some of the children get vaccinated more at a certain period, or by cohort. There are different ways of looking at this data, and the key message is looking at timeliness helps you understand if there is a lot of delays, that you just need to improve the messaging so people get vaccinated more on time. If there are a lot of missed opportunities, means that those children are having a future contact with the health system, but the cards are not being checked and the children are not being put up to date. And again, that has solutions. And this type of graph and the missed opportunity analysis, very useful, very, very useful to look at this and to look at improvements, particularly if in Punjab you're doing periodic surveys. It's beautiful because you could see over time. But make sure that that because this graph depends on when you censor, so at what age, you may miss children who get vaccinated actually much later than the survey. That's an only caveat.
Okay, thank you, Carolina. Dale follows up on his response to Hassan by saying the Wiki documents define the numerators and denominators clearly and give instructions for how to calculate each indicator table. So you could implement those instructions using another software package. And then, yeah, and so Dale adds, I could imagine someday that there would be something called Wiki R, so Wiki for the R package. And I think there's quite a dense exchange between Bo, Robert, Brzezinski, Pedersen, and Dale Rhoda. So perhaps, Dale, if you could summarize yes, the nature of the discussion and its relevance for other participants, that'd be much appreciated.
Yeah, but Bo's always thinking 1 or 2 or 3 steps ahead. So he's asking, hey, it sounds like we could, I'll put words in his mouth. It sounds like we could calculate a lot of these other indicators for some standard data sets that are sitting around on some expensive, valuable data sets that have been used for other things, but that haven't had all the juice squeezed from them for vaccination coverage. So can we have a tool that will just translate a mixed data set to run through Wiki, or a DHS data set to run through Wiki? And so I just let him know, yes, we have that. We use that here in our office. It's a little bit of a custom job each time. You can't just push a button and have it work without any intervention. But in the course of less than 1 work day now, we can convert a mixed data set or a DHS data set to make it compatible with Wiki, and then we can calculate the things that Carolina has been describing. Over.
Great, thank you, Dale. And Bo, would you like to add anything to that? Let me unmute you, and we are going to wrap up this session. So let me know if you have in the chat or in the by raising your hand if you have any remaining questions or comments. Go ahead, Bo.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, loud and clear.
No, it was perfectly perfect what Dale said. Yes, it would be wonderful to have a well, quick and dirty is wrong, a quick tool to basically convert all these data sets that are available into Wiki, because it just makes a lot of sense to use what is already available. But as Dale is saying, it is challenging to do, because obviously for vaccination, every single survey is different because of the schedules of the country, etc., and customization that is done. And I just mentioned to Dale that we are working on, as DHS, to have a standardized recoded data set available through a tool that hopefully within a year will become available in Mix. That's all I had to say. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Bo. All right, so in order, as we wrap up this session, Carolina points you to the shares in Scholar for examples and analyses, and explains that WHO hopes to provide guidance on secondary analysis in 2018. So, and I see one more. I saw one more hand raised that's gone down. So I believe we're now at the end of the session. Again, as you know, as soon as the recording's posted or even before, you can, of course, go into Scholar, ask your questions or comments, drop in for office hours, or even email the course team, surveys@learning.foundation. Many ways to get support as you dig into the, as you deep dive into your creator project this week. And again, to clarify, everyone has received a notification for the manager assignments, but if you're an analyst, you want to ignore that one and accept only the analyst notification. And for the person who doesn't seem to have received, for Annika, who hasn't received the notification for the analyst project, I'm going to look into that right after this session is up. Thank you very much. Thank you, Carolina, Dale, Felicity, John, and of course to the participants. I'm going to now unmute everyone so that we get to make a little bit of noise, and mostly office noise. Hear what our offices sound like from all of them.
Thanks, Rita.
Thanks, Rita, Dale, and Carolina, and all other scholars from the world. Thank you very much.